ruling by fear. That's always been one of the tactics employed by colonizers to control the masses. And the latest manifestation of this scare and conquer policy is what some call Coronialism. Hello and welcome to Inside Israel. I'm Mariam Azacher. Now, since the beginning of the outbreak, the Israeli regime has used coronavirus pandemic as an excuse to further impose itself in people's lives. This gave way to implementation of intrusive surveillance measures. Now, this following package will tell you more.
Since the coronavirus outbreak in Israel began, the regime in Tel Aviv has used it to advance several goals, including intrusive surveillance measures and putting into motion the rapid centralization of powers. Israel has unleashed Big Brother-style surveillance across streets, hospitals, and hovering around in drones. The goal? Israel states it is for coronavirus purposes, but others dispute this. Israelis believe that there are ulterior motives. A new report revealed that Israel keeps a huge secret database on movement of people and cars in Israel. There is footage being kept from smart cameras that can identify a person by their face and also vehicle types and license plate numbers without any oversight mechanism. This program is managed by the police, but no entity audits the information they have or who they follow. The video footage is safe for at least 6 months and possibly years. That means there is a massive database on the movement of innocent Israelis, just in case they or their vehicle are involved in a crime in the future.
אבל להערכתי, אולי אני טועה, בסדר? להערכתי, אנשים רוצים לדעת שיש חשש גדול שהם היו בקרבת אדם עם קורונה, ואם היו עושים סקר כללי, לשאול בן אדם היה רוצה לקבל SMS מהכלי הזה, הוא לא היה רואה בזה פגיעה בפרטיות, היה אומר, וואלה, תגידו לי, אני לא רוצה להדביק את המשפחה שלי.
The issue of regime tracking of movement has emerged into the public eye in recent weeks, as law enforcement authorities have sought and received permission from authorities, and they did quickly, to use phone data to track the movement of people.
אני חושב שצריך להפסיק מיד את השימוש בכלי, אני חושב שגם את תהליך החקיקה אין צורך בו, ויפה שעה אחת קודם.
One cannot explain the decision by Benny Gantz, who claimed to represent the anti-Netanyahu opposition, to betray his voters and join Netanyahu's cabinet without resorting to Coronialist rhetoric. Gantz claimed that he joined Netanyahu as part of an emergency cabinet to manage the coronavirus epidemic in Israel. In doing so, Gantz not only saved Netanyahu from losing the premiership, but also paved the way for him to rule while being on trial for corruption. This further emboldened Netanyahu to make fundamental changes that further bolster his power. Israel's top court just ruled that the new unity cabinet led by Netanyahu is legal, despite many activists who believe that the very nature of it violates Israeli rules.
Now, who is behind these measures? How do they affect Israeli lives? This next exclusive case study from Israel answers these questions and more.
Governments, and among them Israeli government, find it conducive to increase its control or consolidate its power. No question about that. And yes, and I think specifically our Prime Minister Netanyahu is very adept and doing that. Actually, it was, if you wish, the background conditions allowing him to form the coalition government suiting to his political party and on top of it, of course, suiting his conducive to his personal interest and I mean by that. After all, there are severe charges being pressed against him, and he is to be in court. Actually, he already appeared in court, facing severe charges of bribery, fraud, breach of trust, and so to the point where this crisis can help him salvage himself, escape from court, of course that he would have no hesitation using this crisis to further his personal interest. No one questions that. I think that it is kind of truism, kind of common wisdom that Netanyahu actually is doing that. Though I am concerned that the situation would allow justifiably to tip the balance towards security concern and therefore undermining, hurting basic human rights, or if you wish, privacy. That indeed it might be unjustifiably detrimental to privacy. I mean, I don't know what you see. I mean, there is something like how to put it. Now we have about the largest government ever. Now, it is not really a question of resources, because at the end of the day, okay, you have 20 ministers, 30 ministers, now we have 36 ministers. Well, it is huge. It is too large. But I think the most important thing here is how to put it. It's more symbolic than the economic issue. That the time we're living in time that we have rampant unemployment. Small businesses are just going out of business, collapsing. And then on the other hand, to see that such a large government, it seems that some kind of, if you wish, indicating indifference to the plight of so many people. We saw that even people who were actually voted by left voters, at the end of the day, deserted their parties and collided with the right-wing parties, allowing Netanyahu to form again a coalition government, which of course led to a lot of anger, frustration among people who were voting center-left, specifically voting for Gantz, because well, his recent death in the last election, saying that I would never sit, I'll never be part to a government formed by Netanyahu.
Activist Jeff Halper joins us from Israel. Good to have you with us, Mr. Halper. Now, we know that the voice of Israeli opposition is now officially silenced because the opposition leader entered a unity cabinet with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, he cited the coronavirus pandemic for his decision. What do you make of this?
I think people in Israel in general are angry at Benny Gantz, of course, because it's true, he ran in the election on a program on 3 elections with really one agenda, and that was to get rid of Netanyahu. Politically, he's Likud. They're in the same party. There's no difference between him and Netanyahu politically. So it was really 2 Likud parties running against each other. The issue was Netanyahu himself, both because of the trial and because he's already gotten to be heavy-handed. People don't like him. He's become kind of a burden on the country to some degree. But in the election, there wasn't a clear result. And in the end, yes, people feel that Gantz betrayed the voters by going into the government with most of his party together with Netanyahu. I think Gantz is finished politically. and I think that's, I think it finished him politically, but he'll last out the end of the term, I guess.
Now, this sudden alliance between Gantz and Netanyahu, is it an emergency unity cabinet, or, what's the bigger picture?
The government wasn't really an emergency government. That was just a kind of a pretext that Netanyahu used in order to put pressure on Gantz to come into to the government. So, and that, I don't think anybody sees it as an emergency government. But it is true, of course, that Israel, like other countries, especially authoritarian countries, is using the coronavirus to augment political powers and to do things that it couldn't do normally. We see this also in Hungary, we see it in Brazil, we see it in the United States, and we see it in China, in many authoritarian countries where they're using the coronavirus issue and the powers that it gives police and the government to control people to go into wider areas of control that they've always wanted to do anyway. And certainly Netanyahu is exploiting that. He's got a permanent emergency now, and under that he can use the Shin Bet, he can use surveillance technologies, whatever he wants to, against both the Israeli and the Palestinian populations.
And can you tell us how this intrusive surveillance measures and the rapid centralization of power as a whole being viewed in Israel?
Well, look, the Israeli public doesn't really accept it. Some do, of course. The more right-wing, maybe the less educated people do, the ones that vote for the Likud and the right. They have no problems. But the middle-class population, many Israelis are not comfortable with these measures. So that, for example, the government wanted to use special tracking devices on telephones to track corona, people that were sick, and then they could track them in terms of who their contacts were. Well, that's a good idea in some ways. But, that opens the whole door to now using these technologies that have only been used to track Palestinians, and to use these technologies of the Shin Bet, in a way against or with the Israeli civilian population. And there was a lot of fear. So what Netanyahu wasn't able to do that. And in the different attempts to use these security devices, there's a certain limit on the time that they can do that. This isn't a power that's given to the government just open-ended, but it has to go back to the Supreme Court, it has to go back to the Knesset. So there are some constraints on this that the Israeli people are putting on the government.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Happer. That was anthropologist and political activist Jeff Happer from Israel. Now, what do the Israeli people think about the latest surveillance measures? How do you think their lives will be affected? Coming up after a short break. On the streets of Tel Aviv, we asked Israelis what they thought about the latest measures, including intrusive surveillance, tracking movements of civilians, and increasing fear in people as a whole. And here's how they responded.
מבחינה מוסרית, אני מרגישה שמדינת ישראל הייתה בנויה יותר על ערכים, על מוסר, על איזשהו קונספט שבאמת אנחנו רוצים לחיות פה כי אין לנו מקום אחר. והיום זה כבר לא ככה, בתחושה. היום זה מרגיש שכל אחד דואג לעצמו או לחברים שלו, למקורבים שלו. אין ראייה לטווח ארוך בהרבה דברים. וזה קצת מדאיג, שזה הכל נהיה, כל אחד דואג לעצמו, למשפחה, לחברים שלו, ואנחנו לא דואגים אחד לשני, האזרחים, אז...
נהדר, אני מאוד מרוצה. חוץ מזה שיש כל כך הרבה שרים, שזה בזבוז כסף, והיו צריכים להתחשב בציבור, במצב הנוכחי, שחבל, שזה לא היה אכפת להם כאילו כל כך הרבה שרים.
שהמיקרופון לא ייפול מרוב, אני שונאת את הממשלה הזאת, שונאת את נתניהו. אני לא יכולה לישון בלילה מרוב דאגה. אני חושבת שאנחנו הולכים למקום רע מאוד בגללו, מאוד מסוכן למדינת ישראל. ועם הסיפוח עכשיו בכלל, אני לא יודעת מה יהיה, אני אולי ארד מהארץ. אני לא אשאר פה עם...
זה מאוד מאכזב. מאוד מאכזב. זה מאכזב שמישהו עושה משהו הפוך, אבל זאת הפוליטיקה. בואי נגיד ככה, הפוליטיקאים, החלטת להיות פוליטיקאי, החלטת להיות שקרן. ברגע שהוא החליט להיות פוליטיקאי, הוא החליט להיות שקרן. זה כל הסיפור. תודה לך.
Now, Israeli activists say they're not going to take the new violation of their privacy without a fight. There's already been protests to oppose the implementation of the new mass surveillance measures. As a result, these activists are now being targeted by Israeli special ops officers hired by Israel's so-called Security Council.
Military intelligence officers have been tasked by the National Security Council to help prevent the development of civil unrest as a result of the coronavirus crisis and the protests against Netanyahu and the unity deal. Senior military intelligence aided the National Security Council in gathering information on protesters.
Under the auspices of Corona, Netanyahu is actually establishing his monarchy. It's his dictatorship monarchy. So it's absolute hoax in a way to get Israelis used to being segregated, to being oppressed, to being having surveillance on. And it's like you put people in the extreme, and then every step that you give them a bit of freedom, they're just so thankful for their new acquired freedom, and they don't notice how with each step they take to their freedom, they're actually being imprisoned more and more.
As the coronavirus in Israel kicked in and the protests began, Israel's National Security Agency discussed the possibility of a popular revolt over growing economic, psychological, and health problems in Israel. In the short and medium term, the regime is building the foundations of a new emergency routine based on a number of new realities. Citizens are now forced to accept draconian measures, political disempowerment, and economic ruin with little protest or disobedience. As a hegemonic force, Israel has been quick to change the rules of the game in their favor. Politically, this has included the bypassing of institutions, the bolstering of unchecked executive powers, and new emergency regulations.
אני לא יודעת אם בעוד איזושהי מדינה נורמלית זה יכול להיות, שנאשם בפלילים יכול להגיש את עצמו מועמדות לראשות הממשלה, יכול להרכיב ממשלה, לנהל הכל כרגיל. מה זה, הכלבים נובחים והשיירה עוברת?
It is already clear that most of the new financial arrangements to prop up the economy will mostly go to helping prop up corporations and industries, while leaving behind the marginalized who are now even weaker, stripped of their jobs and dispossessed of social services. These policies will particularly affect labor migrants, temporary workers, small business owners, and the newly unemployed.
Author and journalist Gideon Levy joins us from Tel Aviv to tell us more about the situation in Israel. Welcome to the show, Mr. Levy. Now, what do you think the ultimate goal is behind these colonialist-like policies? And how will they target Israeli people?
The government did use the crisis to centralize power, but it would do so also without the coronavirus crisis. Nobody really took it seriously, because this government has nothing to do with the virus. None of the ministers took it seriously. Benny Gantz didn't take it seriously. It was all about the political deadlock which Israel found itself, and it was the only way to get out of this deadlock, namely to create this unity government. That's the real only purpose of this government.
So why is the Israeli regime so intent on targeting protesters and the public opinion in general?
Israel is divided, but I think the majority of Israelis are happy with this government and are happy with Netanyahu as prime minister. That's a matter of fact. There is no real serious alternative to him, and the left is very beaten and weak and divided and lack any kind of leadership. And it's one of the worst times of the Israeli left ever. And Netanyahu has quite a big responsibility in it. He was clever enough to smash the left, to smash any kind of opposition. And he's as powerful as he was. The only obstacle for him is obviously his trial, which started last week. And he will have to face the charges. It will take many months or even few years. But let's remember that by the end of the day, and this day might be very far away, by the end of the day, he will face very, very serious charges.
So what would you say the biggest danger is here for Israeli citizens?
First of all, the Palestinians are targeting before the epidemic and after it. It has nothing to do. Israel's government is dominating the Palestinian people, and the Palestinian people is living under quite a brutal military occupation, and this is not new, and the government does not need any justifications of coronavirus to use all those undemocratic, anti-democratic measures toward the Palestinian population. When it comes to the Israeli citizens and to Israel itself, yes, there were some measures which were taken under this excuse of using them to fight the virus, and me and many others were rejecting it, were trying to protest against those measures. But I must say that most of the Israelis are quite indifferent about this misuse of anti-democratic measures. And the only hope is that there will be a certain stage in which more Israelis will understand the meaning of it, but we are not there yet.
Well, thank you for joining us, Mr. Levy. That was author and journalist Gideon Levy from Tel Aviv. It's now time to look at the news making the press in Israel. Ynet. More isolated elderly people are dying without anyone taking notice. Since last year, there has been a 33% increase in cases of people with no family whose death went undetected for days or even weeks. The phenomenon worsened due to the coronavirus lockdown, with 59 bodies discovered since the start of 2020. Haaretz. An investigation has begun on the violent arrest of 2 Eritrean asylum seekers in South Tel Aviv, which was caught on video. The police claim that the suspects had attacked police officers at the scene first, and that the initial part of the confrontation was not caught on camera. The victims, however, say that their rights were violated in every way. The Times of Israel. Nearly half of Israel is taking a hard economic hit over the virus. 1 in 7 Israelis are skipping meals. According to Central Bureau of Statistics, there's a 14% increase in those prone to homelessness. 16% think they may lose their jobs, and a third of the population is experiencing feelings of anxiety or pressure. I-24 News. Yet another probe into Netanyahu's corruption charges? A source in the Israeli police department said that a possible 4th corruption investigation into the Israeli prime minister is possible, as they slammed his ongoing attacks on law enforcement as unfounded. The coronavirus has costed many Israelis their health already, and it's now being used to take away their freedoms too. But what can be done to face this newfound Coronialism? Get on PressTV.com and tell us what you think. See you next time.